Insight Podcast.
From Clear English Channel.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to English Insight Podcast. I'm Tom, and today we're talking about something that can quietly frustrate almost every English learner.
Hey, I'm Lily, and yes, this topic can hit a little too close to home.
A little too close, yeah.
Because most people have felt it.
You study for a long time, you try your best, and yet, somehow, you still feel like you are not getting anywhere.
That feeling can be heavy.
It really is, because it is not just about English. It starts to feel personal.
Exactly.
You begin to wonder, am I not smart enough? Am I studying the wrong way? Why does everyone else seem to improve faster than me?
Those are painful questions.
Yeah, and the worst part is, you do not always say them out loud. You just keep carrying them in your head.
And that can make learning feel much heavier than it should.
I think that is what happens to a lot of people. They are not lazy. They are not giving up. They are just tired of trying so hard without feeling real progress.
That is a very important point.
Because when you don't see progress, you start losing trust in yourself.
Yes, first you lose confidence, then you lose motivation. And after that, even a simple study session starts to feel painful.
Exactly. You open your notebook, you tell yourself you should study, but deep down, you already feel tired before you begin.
That is such a real feeling.
And then, one day, you ask yourself, maybe I just don't have what it takes.
Tom, no.
No?
Feeling stuck does not mean you're bad at English. It usually means something in the way you're learning is not helping you enough.
That actually feels a little relieving.
Good, because the problem is often not you. It's the method.
So maybe the real question is not, what is wrong with me?
Exactly.
It's what is missing from the way I learn.
That is the question that can change everything.
So today, let's go deeper into that. Because if learning English has ever made you feel stuck, tired, or even a little defeated, you are definitely not alone.
And the good news is, once you understand why that happens, you can start learning in a way that actually works for you.
So, if the problem is not me, then what is actually going wrong?
That is a very good question.
Because I feel like I am trying hard, but I'm still not getting the result I want.
That usually happens when people are learning the wrong way.
The wrong way?
Yes, and a lot of learners do this without even realizing it.
Like what?
They think they need to learn everything first, all the vocabulary, all the grammar, all the rules, and only then they can start using English.
Yeah, that sounds very familiar.
But that mindset can trap you,
Trap me?
because while you are waiting to be ready, you are not actually using the language.
Huh.
And if you do not use it, your brain starts treating it like information, not a skill.
So I'm studying English, but my brain does not feel like I'm actually learning to use English.
Exactly.
That hurts a little.
It should, because that's the difference most people miss.
So what are they doing instead?
They are collecting pieces, words, rules, lists, exercises.
That sounds like me.
And then they wonder why speaking still feels hard.
Because I know the words, but when I need them, they disappear.
Exactly. Knowing something on paper is not the same as being able to use it in real life.
So maybe that is why people get bored too.
Why do you say that?
Because if I only study lists and rules, there's no real moment where I feel the language.
Yes, no real conversation, no real connection, no real reward.
And then it starts to feel empty.
Exactly. You keep doing the work, but your mind doesn't feel the meaning.
Huh. So the problem is not just that people are lazy.
No.
It's that they're learning as if English is something to finish instead of something to live with.
That's exactly it.
Wow, that explains a lot.
And there's another mistake that makes it even worse.
What is it?
Waiting too long before speaking.
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
Many people think, I will speak when I'm better.
But then they never feel better enough.
Exactly.
So the more I wait, the more scary it becomes.
Yes, and the more scary it becomes, the less you want to try.
That's a bad loop.
It is, and it keeps many learners stuck for years.
So maybe the real problem is not that I don't know enough.
It's that you're waiting too long to use what you already know.
That hits hard.
But it's also good news,
Good news?
because it means you don't need to become perfect first. You need to start using English now.
Huh. That changes the whole picture.
It really does.
So maybe learning English isn't about collecting more and more things. Maybe it's about learning how to use what I already have.
Exactly. And that's where the real method begins.
So, if the problem is not just about collecting more words, then what does learning English really mean?
That is the right question.
Because sometimes it feels like English is just vocabulary, grammar, and exercises.
That is how many people see it, but language is much more than that.
Then what is it?
Language is a skill, and a skill is something you have to use.
Use.
Yes, you do not learn a skill just by looking at it. You learn it by doing it.
So, reading about English is not the same as using English.
Exactly.
That sounds obvious, but when you say it like that, it really hits me.
Because many learners spend years with English, but almost no time actually living with English.
Living with English.
Yes, listening to it, speaking with it, reacting to it, making mistakes with it, coming back to it again and again. That is how language becomes real.
So, if I only read and memorize,
You are only touching the surface.
wow.
Think about it like this. If you wanted to learn how to swim, would you just read about swimming?
Of course not.
Exactly. You would have to get into the water.
So, language is the same?
Yes, you can read about it forever, but until you actually use it, your brain does not fully treat it as a real ability.
That explains so much.
And it also explains why so many learners feel stuck,
Because they are studying the language.
but not experiencing it.
So, learning English is not just about understanding more.
Right, it's about building a response.
A response?
Yes, when you hear something, you can answer. When you think something, you can say it. When you see a pattern, you can use it.
So, the language has to move.
Exactly. It has to move from your head to your mouth to real life.
That feels very different from what I used to do.
Most people are taught to collect information, but language is not something you collect. It's something you train.
Train.
Yes, just like a muscle. If you never use it, it stays weak.
So, my English is not broken, it just needs practice.
Exactly.
That actually feels encouraging, because it means I don't have to know everything first.
You do not.
I just need to start using it more.
That is where progress begins.
So the real method is not learn first, use later.
It is use, then improve.
Use, then improve.
Yes, that is how language becomes alive.
Wow, that changes the way I see everything.
And now that we understand that, the next question is, what actually helps you learn English in a way that feels real and effective?
So, if language is a skill, then what is the best way to build it?
That is the most important question now.
Because I feel like this is where everything changes.
It does. The method matters a lot.
So where do we start?
Start with something simple. You need to understand English before you can use it well.
Understand it first.
Yes, but not in a perfect way. You do not need to understand every single word.
Good, because that would take forever.
Exactly. What you need is enough understanding to follow the meaning.
So not perfect understanding, just enough to get the idea.
Right. That is what makes learning feel possible instead of painful.
That already feels less stressful.
Good, because if everything feels too difficult, your brain shuts down.
That happens to me a lot.
Then the next step is this. You need to use the language even if your English is still small.
Use it, even now.
Yes, especially now.
But what if I make mistakes?
You will. That is not a problem.
That was a very direct answer.
Because it is the truth.
I think a lot of people are waiting to speak only when they feel ready.
And that is exactly why they stay stuck.
Hmm.
Waiting to be ready can become a trap. You keep preparing, but you never really start.
That feels painfully familiar.
You do not need perfect English to begin. You need active English.
Active English.
Yes, speaking, writing, thinking, reacting, using what you know even in small ways.
So even short sentences count.
Absolutely. A short sentence that you really use is more powerful than a long list of words you never touch.
That one hurts a little, but I know it is true.
Good, because the brain learns through action,
But if I only use a little English, how do I get better?
through repetition.
Repetition.
But not boring repetition, repetition with variation.
What does that mean?
It means you see and use the same idea again, but in different ways.
Like how?
Maybe you hear a phrase in a video, then you use it in a sentence, then you see it in another context, then you try it in speaking.
So it's not just repeating the same thing like a robot.
Exactly. It's meeting the language again and again until it starts to feel familiar.
That makes sense. Because the first time I see something, I forget it. But if I keep meeting it again, it starts to stay.
Yes, that is how memory becomes stronger.
And what about real life? Because sometimes I feel like I understand lessons, but real conversations still feel different.
That's the last big piece. You need real context.
Real context.
English shouldn't live only in your notebook. It should appear in situations, conversations, stories, and daily life.
So not just isolated words.
Exactly. Words become easier when they live inside a real moment.
So the real method is not one trick, it's a combination.
Exactly. Understand enough to follow, use what you know early, repeat it in different ways, and learn it inside real situations.
That sounds much more natural than what I used to do.
Because it is natural.
I think I used to believe that learning English meant collecting more and more information.
A lot of people believe that.
But now it sounds more like building a habit of using it.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
So the method that works best is not the one that makes me feel busy, it's the one that makes me use English more. That's actually much simpler than I expected.
Simple does not mean easy, but it does mean clear.
And if I get this right, I stop studying English like a school subject.
And start learning it like a real skill.
So, if the method is about actually using English, then what is the biggest mistake people make?
Honestly, it is that they learn English without really experiencing it.
Experiencing it?
Yes, they study it, they review it, they write it down, but they do not live with it. And when that happens, English stays far away from real life. It stays in books, in notes, in exercises.
Not in real conversations.
Exactly.
I think I understand that a little too well,
Most learners do.
because it feels safer to study than to speak.
Yes, studying feels controlled. Speaking feels exposed.
Exposed, that is a strong word.
But it is true. When you speak, people can hear your mistakes. They can hear your pauses. They can hear that you are still learning.
And that is exactly what makes people freeze.
Yes, they wait until they feel ready. They wait until they feel confident. They wait until they feel good enough.
But that moment never really comes.
Not if you keep waiting for it.
That is painful, because it sounds so familiar.
It is familiar to many people. They know a lot more than they think, but they are afraid to use it.
So the real problem is not knowledge.
It is hesitation.
Hmm.
And hesitation grows when you believe you must be perfect before you begin.
Yeah, I have definitely felt that.
The truth is, you do not need perfect English to start. You need English in motion.
English in motion?
Using it, trying it, speaking it badly at first if necessary, writing a short message, answering a question, making one small sentence work.
Speaking it badly at first sounds scary, but honest.
It is honest, and honesty helps more than pretending to be ready.
So every time I wait because I'm afraid of mistakes, I'm actually slowing myself down.
Exactly, because mistakes are not the enemy. Avoiding them is what keeps you stuck.
That hits hard.
It should, because a lot of learners are not failing because they know too little. They are failing because they refuse to use what they already know.
That is a difficult truth.
But it is also freeing.
Freeing?
Yes, because it means you do not need to become someone else first. You do not need to wait for a future version of yourself. You can start now.
Start now.
Even if your English is simple, even if your sentences are short, even if your voice shakes a little.
That feels more possible.
Good, because that's where real progress begins.
So the biggest mistake is not really about grammar.
No,
It's about staying outside the language instead of stepping into it.
exactly. You can't learn to swim by standing at the edge forever.
There's that swimming example again.
Because it works.
So if I want to get better, I need to stop treating English like something I'll use later.
Yes, use it in small ways now.
That changes everything.
It really does, because once you start experiencing English, it stops being just knowledge and starts becoming part of you.
That feels like the real lesson.
And that brings us to the next part, because there are a few simple things that can help you learn faster and keep going longer.
So, if the real problem is not that I need more information, what should I focus on instead?
That is the right question.
Because I feel like I've been trying to do everything. More words, more rules, more lessons, but I still don't feel stable.
Then let's make it simpler. The first thing you need is consistency.
Consistency.
Not a perfect day, not a huge study session once in a while, just a steady habit you can actually keep.
So it is not about studying for 10 hours once.
No, it is about showing up again and again.
That feels more realistic.
Good, because language grows through repetition over time.
And what else?
Engagement.
Engagement.
You need to care about what you are learning. If it feels cold, boring, and disconnected, your brain will not stay with it for long.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I'm interested, I learn faster.
Exactly. Interest makes the process lighter.
So maybe I should stop forcing myself to study things I hate.
Not everything has to be exciting, but your learning should have some real pull, something that makes you want to come back.
That feels important.
It is, because if you never feel drawn into the language, it will always feel like a task instead of a skill.
Right.
Then there's feedback.
Feedback.
Yes, you need some way to know what is working and what is not.
So I shouldn't just study and hope for the best.
Exactly. You need to notice your progress. You need to hear yourself improve. You need moments that tell your brain, this is moving.
That explains a lot. Because sometimes I work hard, but I never really check if I'm getting better.
And that can drain motivation fast.
Yeah. If I don't see any change, I start doubting everything.
That is why feedback matters. It gives your effort a direction.
And the last one.
Patience.
Patience.
This is the part many people struggle with most. They want fast results. They want to feel fluent quickly. But language does not grow that way.
Yeah, I wish it did.
We all do. But real progress takes time. And if you keep expecting instant results, you'll keep feeling disappointed.
So patience is not just waiting.
No, it's staying with the process long enough for it to work.
That sounds harder than it should.
It usually is.
But I guess if I keep showing up, keep caring about what I learn, check my progress, and stay patient,
Then you give yourself a real chance.
So the method is not only about what I study.
Exactly.
It's also about how you stay with it.
Consistency, engagement, feedback, patience.
Yes, those are the things that make learning last.
That actually feels a lot clearer now.
Good, because you don't need to do everything perfectly. You need to build a process that keeps you moving.
So if I put all of this together, the best method is not about doing more and more.
It is about doing the right things in a way you can continue.
So, if the best method is really about using English in a real way, then maybe I've been looking at learning all wrong.
In what way?
I used to think I had to wait until I knew more, wait until I felt ready, wait until I was better.
And now?
Now I feel like waiting was the thing holding me back.
Exactly. Because language does not grow in waiting, it grows in use.
That's such a simple idea, but it changes everything.
It really does. When you use English, even a little, you start building something real.
So the goal is not to study forever.
No, the goal is to make English part of your life.
Huh. That sounds a lot more real than the way I used to study.
Good, because real learning should not stay stuck in your notebook.
Right. It should come out when I speak, when I listen, when I write, when I react.
Yes, that is when it becomes yours.
I think that's what I was missing most. I knew things, but I didn't feel like they belonged to me yet,
And now you know why.
because I wasn't using them enough.
Exactly. Knowledge becomes skill when you use it often enough.
You know, this actually feels encouraging,
Good.
because it means I do not need to become perfect first. I just need to begin.
Yes, you begin small. You stay consistent, and you let the process work.
So maybe the real victory is not speaking perfectly.
No, the real victory is not giving up before the language has time to grow.
That's powerful.
And it's true, because every learner starts somewhere small.
Yeah, I guess everybody who speaks well now was once exactly where I am.
Absolutely, they were beginners too. The difference is that they kept going.
So the path is not really mysterious. It's just use, repeat, adjust, and keep moving.
That's it.
I like that. It feels doable.
It is doable. And that is the point. The best method is not the one that sounds impressive. It is the one you can actually live with.
Huh. I think that's the biggest lesson today.
What do you mean?
I spent so long trying to find the perfect way, but maybe what I really needed was a real way.
Exactly.
A way that helps me feel progress, a way that gives me real connection, a way that lowers pressure and keeps curiosity alive.
Yes, that is the kind of learning that lasts.
Wow, that sounds much better than just cramming words all day.
It usually is.
Quietly and sincerely, I feel like I can finally breathe a little.
Good, because learning should not crush you, it should open you up.
Yeah, that's what I want. Not just to know English, but to actually live it.
That's the right direction.
So maybe the best method really is simple after all. Understand enough, use it early, repeat it often, and stay with it.
Exactly. And when you do that, English stops being something you chase, it becomes something you carry.
I love that.
So next time you study English, don't just ask, how much did I learn? Ask, how much did I use?
That changes everything.
It really does. And that's where real progress begins.
Warmfully and naturally, thank you for being here with us today.
And remember, the best method is the one that gets you speaking, listening, and living the language.
Calm and satisfied. See you next time.
On English Insight Podcast.